The wind howled like a ghost through the marbled halls of the Capitol, tugging at Senator John Kennedy's coat as he stepped onto the Senate floor. Cameras clicked like distant gunfire. The air was thick not just with anticipation, but with something more visceral, the electric tension of two worlds colliding. You could feel it in your chest like the moment before thunder cracks. Everyone knew something was about to happen. No one knew quite what. But they could sense it, the way animals sense a coming storm. Kennedy walked with the kind of deliberate calm that only came from years of political battles, personal loss, and a deep, unshakable belief in the country he served. His drawl was slow, but there was no mistaking the razor edge behind it. To his supporters, he was a champion of old-school integrity. To his critics, he was a relic of another era, but no one, on either side, doubted that when he spoke, people listened. And then there was Ilhan Omar, a woman whose journey had already defied every odd. Born in Somalia, raised in a Kenyan refugee camp, and finally arriving in America as a child with nothing but questions and grit, Omar had climbed a ladder most people never even got to see. Her voice carried the fire of conviction. She spoke fast from the gut and sometimes without a filter, but always with purpose. To her supporters, she was a beacon for the voiceless. To her detractors, she was dangerous, radical. Unapologetically so. Their collision wasn't planned. It happened the way political fate often does, unexpectedly, violently, and in full view of the nation. It began during a hearing on defense funding, one that had ballooned into a philosophical showdown about the soul of America. Omar had just delivered a scathing critique of what she called America's addiction to military solutions, her voice rising and trembling with the weight of her past. She spoke of drone strikes in Mogadishu, of neighborhoods she once played in reduced to smoke. Her words were personal, raw, and deeply uncomfortable. She wasn't just arguing policy, she was reliving trauma. Kennedy listened, arms crossed, face stone still. And then came the moment. He stood, walked forward, and adjusted his microphone. There was a silence in the room that felt like the inhale before a scream. "Congresswoman," he said, voice calm, almost gentle, "you say America is addicted to war, but let me ask you this. If the fireman pulls your child from a burning house, do you blame him for the flames?" The room froze. Omar opened her mouth, but no words came. It was the kind of line that didn't just silence a room, it echoed. The sentence hung in the air, searing itself into the minds of everyone who heard it. Not because it was cruel, but because it cut. Because it turned the argument on its head in a way that left no footing. And for a woman like Omar, who had built her entire public life on the clarity of moral outrage, being speechless was its own kind of destruction. But this wasn't just a political theater. Beneath the drama lay two human beings shaped by radically different scars. Kennedy had once held his wife in his arms as she died of cancer. The disease had devoured her slowly, relentlessly. In those long nights, he learned that you couldn't always talk your way through suffering. Sometimes you had to fight. That was why he believed in hard power, not because he liked it, because he'd seen what happened when you didn't fight back. Omar, on the other hand, had seen bombs fall before she'd ever seen a playground. She'd held her brother's hand through barbed wire fences, seen neighbors disappear in the night, and heard the sound of helicopters long before she understood what countries even were. Her distrust of military might wasn't theory, it was memory, and this was the real story, not a takedown. Not a zinger, but a clash of wounds. The fallout was immediate. Social media erupted. News channels looped the clip endlessly. One network dubbed it the moment Kennedy ended Omar's credibility. Another called it a masterclass in rhetoric. But as the days passed, something strange happened. The headlines faded, but the conversation didn't. People began asking harder questions. What did it mean to be a force for good in the world? Could two people, both shaped by tragedy, come to radically different conclusions and still deserve to be heard? Back in their offices, away from cameras, both Kennedy and Omar found themselves reflecting. Kennedy poured himself a glass of bourbon that night and stared at a photo of his late wife. "What would you have said?" he whispered. He didn't have an answer. Omar sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment, sifting through childhood photographs she rarely looked at. Her daughter came in, curling beside her. "Why do people get so mad at you?" the girl asked. Omar didn't answer immediately. Then, softly, "Because I say things they're not ready to hear." In the days that followed, something unexpected unfolded. Omar requested a private meeting with Kennedy. He agreed. They sat across from each other in a quiet committee room. "No staff, no cameras. I hated what you said," she told him. "I figured you might." He replied, "But it made me think." "Me too." There was a pause. Then Kennedy leaned forward. "I wasn't trying to destroy you, Congresswoman, just trying to show you a part of the world you might have missed." Omar looked down. "Maybe I needed that." And there it was, not an alliance, not agreement, but understanding. Meanwhile, in the background of all this drama, two subplots had been unfolding quietly. One involved a young staffer named Rachel, who worked for Kennedy. She had joined politics to change the world, but had grown jaded, until the day of the hearing, when she saw two giants clash and realized that even amidst vitriol, there was still room for courage and clarity. She would go on to run for office herself, using that moment as a turning point in her own life. The second subplot followed a Somali-American high school teacher in Minnesota named Hamza, who had never felt seen until Omar entered Congress. When he watched her falter in that hearing, he felt something break inside. But when he later learned about the private meeting, about the quiet dignity with which she acknowledged the moment, his admiration grew deeper. He taught his students not to fear mistakes, but to learn from them, and that, he told them, was exactly what leadership looked like. The final chapter of this story didn't come with applause or a standing ovation. It came in the form of a joint statement quietly issued months later, co-sponsored by Kennedy and Omar, pushing for a bipartisan review of American military spending abroad. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning, and maybe that was the point. Destruction wasn't always the end. Sometimes it was just the clearing needed to build something stronger. So when people say John Kennedy ended Ilhan Omar's career with one line, they're not wrong. But they're not entirely right either, because what he really ended was a cycle of talking past each other, and what they both started was something much rarer. A conversation worth having, and in today's world, that might just be the most powerful thing of all.